I just note that the meeting will be recorded. So that's us now recording. So I've started. Can I ask Stuart for the sediment and intimate apologies?
Thank you, Chair. So Councillor George Mayer.
Here.
Thank you. Councillor Ian Grant.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Gordon Jenkins. Councillor Jenkins. Come back to that. Councillor John McFadden. Councillor McFadden. Come back to that one. Councillor Maureen Mackay.
Present, Stuart, thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Helen Coffey.
Here.
Thank you. Councillor John Campbell. Thank you. Councillor Jim Todd.
Yes, Stuart.
Yeah, thank you. With an apology from Councillor Sally Cogley and Councillor John Bell. Councillor Bell. Okay, and an apology from Councillor Elaine DeWitty. Can I just try Councillor Gordon Jenkins again? Councillor Jenkins, are you here? Okay, and Councillor John McFadden. Just a last try, Councillor John Bell. Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Stuart. If we can go into item 2 of the agenda, which is the previous minutes on pages 3 to 5. Oh, sorry, we forgot the declarations of interest. If anyone has anything to declare, just I'd like to declare myself in terms of the education service that my daughter's the deputy head at one of the schools, but it's I'm still going to be here. I'm not going to exclude myself. So we'll now, if there's no one else, we'll now move on to the previous minutes on pages 3 to 5. Agree to note. Those approves a correct record. Thank you. The next item is the Education Service Standards and Quality Report 2020-21, and Graham McGinn's going to take this. Graham.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, members and colleagues. I'm delighted to present the Education Service Standards and Quality Report for members' consideration this morning. The recommendations are detailed on page 6, and I'd particularly like to highlight the second recommendation of congratulating the children and young people of East Ayrshire on their resilience and outstanding achievements in what was undoubtedly a very challenging school year last year for them. This is an annual report that summarises the key achievements of the Education Service, and this report is for school session 2020-21. The report is submitted to Scottish Government as part of the reporting requirements of the National Improvement Framework for Education, and it complements the individual school and early childhood centre standards and quality reports that each establishment prepares at the end of each school session. The covering report, as you'll see, highlights the range of areas that are covered within the Standards and Quality Report, and you'll see that from this there are a wide range of areas covered. It's not my intention this morning to summarise all of these, but I would like to highlight the following. The first one is our response to COVID-19 on page 14 of the report, and in particular the developments in digital learning and teaching that was so important throughout last session, as children, young people, parents and teachers adapted to remote and blended learning. I'd also like to highlight the impact of home light workers on page 16 in supporting families during periods of school closures, and the key role they carried out in working with partners to support families with the greatest levels of need. I'd also like to highlight the improvements in the school estate on page 20, with the opening of the Barney campus and the refurbishment of Lonehead Primary School and Early Childhood Centre. This was along with the opening of Bellsbank Primary School Early Childhood Centre and Community Facility, which I had the pleasure of visiting recently and was so impressed with the opportunities that the new facility offers the children and the wider community. Also included within the report that I'd like to highlight is the introduction of the school counselling service on page 40 to support the well-being of children and young people. And finally, the opening of the new employability hub in Titchfield Street in Kilmarnock to provide training opportunities to support young people into further training or employment opportunities depending on their needs. So, as I said, fairly detailed report. I've highlighted some of the key areas that I'd like to draw out for members' attention this morning, but I'm happy to answer any questions that members may have, and I'll hand back to yourself, Chair.
Thanks, Graham. I'm sure the members would join in your comments about the difficulties that have been ensued, and I think now, having noted the emails that are flying about, we're in a very difficult situation now with COVID, but I think we should all congratulate the Education Department on how well they're doing. Thanks. I'll just throw it open for questions. Councillor Grant Ian.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. The Chinese have an expression which is, may you live in interesting times. And I'm quite sure for the Education Department, you'd very much like them to be a bit less interesting as we go forward. But I'd like to join the others in congratulating everyone from the headmasters and headmistresses, the children, the teachers, the cleaning staff, everybody who's had an extra workload this year and had extra responsibility and has in many ways had it made tougher for them. This is a remarkable report in view of those circumstances, and I hope you'll pass on my thanks along with everybody else's.
I don't see anyone else waiting to come in, so if that's all, we'll move on to the next item on the agenda, item 4, submission of the Climate Change Public Sector Report from Andrew Kennedy. Thanks, Andrew.
Thanks, Chair. I'm going to take you quickly through the covering report. So this is our annual submission of the Climate Change Public Sector Report. Obviously, this has been a statutory response since 2009. So over 10 years we've been reporting and obviously taking action to reduce our climate emissions. Clearly there's been significant activity over the last 18 months and in particularly over the last kind of 6 months as we agreed our climate change action plan and strategy, and obviously over the last couple of months we've been doing significant engagement in line with what's been happening internationally with COP26. So what this report though however sets out is obviously our kind of statistical returns, the detail, the measurements of that kind of carbon footprint. It is reporting 2021, so it's obviously that first full year during COVID, and clearly within the report you'll see a number of direct impacts that we've seen, which have given us, I suppose, a negative impact in terms of our carbon footprint and some of the figures going in the opposite direction. So just to kind of run quickly through the report, clearly the sort of background just sets obviously that context around climate change and what the ambition has been, and clearly what we've set out in our own climate strategy this year is obviously to up that ambition and move quicker and at a kind of larger scale, not just in terms of the council but across East Ayrshire. This report obviously doesn't reflect any of the impacts of that because obviously it's for 2021. As I've said, as a statutory report, the appendix sets out the detail in terms of what our actions have been, the activity that we've been taking, and it's obviously set out in a fairly standard structure in line with the government requirements. The next section from paragraph 16 sets out our approach, and clearly there's a number of strategies, policy documents, etc., that over the years have reflected our actions around climate change. But again, this year we've obviously started to bring that together into one kind of integrated strategy. But clearly the actions set out in paragraph 19 are all still very relevant and will continue to focus on these areas. The actual data is kind of presented and analysed from paragraph 23. So you'll see there that obviously from our baseline of 2012, 2013, we are still considerably improved on that position, but from the table on paragraph 28, you will see that obviously over the last kind of 12 months from 1920 to 2021, you'll see an increase in both scope 1 and scope 3. I'll give you a wee bit of detail about what those scopes are. Obviously, they are set out in the following paragraphs. Scope 1 is mainly around our kind of direct fuel use, so gas, diesel, petrol, etc. So that includes obviously our fleet and our buildings. The vast majority of that is the gas within our buildings, and the members will be aware, obviously, looking at the climate change strategy. Roughly, it's about 45% our buildings in terms of our carbon footprint, 45% in terms of our waste, and about 10 to 12% in terms of our fleet. Basically, are the main areas. Obviously, in terms of this report, those are broken down into the 3 scopes that are presented. Scope 2, you'll see a considerable improvement over the last 10 years, and that improvement's obviously continued in 2021. 2 main reasons, clearly, as set out in paragraph 31, we have reduced the amount of energy, electricity, grid electricity that we're using, but also nationally there's obviously that drive to decarbonise the electricity production, which is also reflected then in terms of the weighting factor that's put on that scope. If I just jump back to obviously the impact in terms of our gas usage, then clearly COVID has had a massive impact. We have seen reductions in gas use because obviously some buildings were closed, but that's been more than offset by the activity in schools, clearly. So to address the ventilation in school, then clearly one of the key actions has been to open windows, create additional airflow, and obviously that has resulted in increased use of the heating systems. It also was a colder year, so we did have more days with the heating on, and obviously the overall temperatures were colder. So both of those things have had a real impact on the gas usage and scope 1. In terms of scope 3, again, the vast majority of that scope is covered by the municipal or domestic waste collection. And again, obviously with the first 3 months of the year, the recycling collections were stood down for that period of time, and obviously subsequently through the rest of the year, as restrictions were on people being able to go out, then clearly a lot more of home deliveries and people buying things in from the shops, etc., to their house has went into the domestic waste rather than maybe the commercial waste through businesses. So again, that's seen a considerable increase in the amount of waste that we've had to process, but also a reduction in obviously the amount that's then went to recycling as well, which again has a significant negative impact for that year. Clearly, we would expect to see significant improvements on both those areas as we move out of COVID and get back to some level of normality. And clearly the action plan and strategy that we've established this year is very focused on these areas in terms of further areas of improvement. The following paragraphs from paragraph 35 just set out a number of the actions that we've been taking, obviously in addition to some of the overall kind of new strategy, and again just some of the detail around that in terms of building management systems, investment in our component renewal, street lighting, and obviously our fleet. Again, continuing to increase the number of electric vehicles and the LED lights across our communities. Paragraph 42 just sets out some of those sort of probably big strategic areas that we continue to work on and have been noted for the last couple of years, and again we'll continue to focus our attention for the next few years, and I think will make a massive difference on the steps that we need to take to further improve our climate actions. The core demonstrator project, the work we're doing through the capital programme, particularly with some of the school estate, are significant in terms of the role that those projects will play in driving down our carbon footprint. There's clearly a number of national issues as well that are developing, and obviously things like the public sector building standards and further consultations that are being run by the government at the moment will further enhance and improve the direction of travel as well, just around kind of obviously what we'll be able to achieve over the coming years. And again, just obviously noting that likes of the Barney campus, as Graham's already mentioned, has opened this year, and obviously that will see significant improvements in terms of our energy use across the school estate. From paragraph 57, it just sets out some of the key areas around the national ambition that, again, obviously members will be aware of in terms of information that's been presented around COP26, and again from paragraph 60 it just sets out a bit more detail around some of the action areas that we've been doing this year around the new climate strategy and action plan, and we'll be reporting back to members early in the new year, I would expect, just around the feedback that we're getting from the engagement surveys, etc., that are set out in that section of the report. I'm expecting that we'll do some sort of member engagement, probably early January, around that feedback, as well as obviously bringing it back to Cabinet, etc. So in terms of the recommendations, members, obviously the report has been submitted to the Scottish Government, and obviously just noting the actions that we are already taking, the sort of change, as I say, in ambition that Council took decisions in June to agree to the action plan and the consultation. Clearly there are a number of wider impacts in terms of government strategies, and examples noted there in terms of local heat and energy efficiency strategy that the council will need to take forward, and then just recognising obviously that a lot of the work that we've done linked to Graham's report is absolutely been driven by our children and young people, not just in terms of Cabinet but across all our schools, and we had obviously over 700 young people engaged in our young persons conference in October. So happy to take any questions, and I'll leave it there. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Andrew. Questions, members? Don't see anyone's hand up. Could I maybe ask Andrew, in relation to paragraph 54, you talk about the waste management, and it's mentioned there about the deposit return scheme, which I understand the government has delayed. I think it was supposed to be coming in early next year, but it seems to have been delayed. I was wondering if we're taking account of that. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. So the waste management, I mean, there's clearly a number of steps in terms of the waste hierarchy, and clearly that's where kind of the focus has been from the council's point of view. So that starting point about reducing and reusing, as well as recycling, and then obviously how we manage any residual waste that would be going to landfill. The work that the council's already done in terms of the recycling collection schemes, and obviously the waste bin system that's introduced in East Ayrshire actually has obviously made a massive difference in terms of recycling. There's a number of other national policies as well, and one of them being around the kind of producer pays as well as one of the ones that's going to be key. So it does appear that the government is looking at a number of these different elements, and clearly the deposit return scheme is just one element of that. But there does seem to be a kind of review of a number of those national kind of policies around the waste, because clearly, that, as we've set out in our own strategy, waste, particularly food waste, plastics, etc., the opportunities to reduce the amount of that going to landfill are already there within the system, and more we can promote that, even with what's already there, never mind the introduction of these new policies, would still make a massive difference.
Thank you. Councillor Todd.
Thanks, convener. Thanks, Andrew. It's the age-old one about street lighting, and it's just some advice I would like off you, if that's okay. And it's in terms of people's perception of how bright an area is. There's been a lot of work going on with the new types of lamps that's gone into the standard lamps, and in some areas people perceive that they're not as bright as they were. If that's the case, and in those cases, do we send guys out to check if an area is designated as maybe not as bright as possible? I'm talking on a safety aspect here. I'm going out to see somebody tonight who's been complaining that with the new standards that went up, the area is a lot darker, and especially in those areas that really are dark. It's just about safety in older folks' areas. And do we have a policy where we can use brighter lamps in those areas? Thank you.
Councillor Todd, I'm going to have to pass that one on to someone else from roads, basically, and get somebody to come back to you. Get somebody to come back to you today, basically, just to give you the update. But clearly, LED lamps do give off a different light, but certainly I can confirm with roads in terms of the safety issues.
Quite happy with that, Jim. Yep. Councillor Mackay.
Councillor Mayor, thank you very much. Andrew, it was just to ask a question. I am aware that there have been some issues that have been raised in relation to recycling within our schools. It's not that the children are not recycling, but I think we've had some difficulty. I don't know if it's how widespread it is, but I'm certainly aware of some particular schools. And I wonder if you are confident that we have now got processes and systems in place to be able to ensure that the children's recycling is followed through basically end to end by us.
Through you, Chair. Yes, Councillor Mackay. I mean, I think probably the two elements there is that I think that there's certainly been questions asked just around the work that we're doing. Following the Young People's Conference, one of the things that we've obviously set in place is each of the schools going back and developing their own action plans. And that will kind of develop into a kind of recognition scheme for each of the schools from next year. That effectively is I suppose raised the profile of a number of these issues. And although there is the recycling in the schools, and obviously that flows through in terms of what is picked up within the school, I would agree that probably the perception of that has not been as clear as it could be. And I would certainly expect, as part of the next update around the future action plan, then I think there will be an ask probably for some further investment in schools, just to kind of raise the profile, potentially add in some additional recycling bins within the school. Some of the areas, particularly likes of the playgrounds, is probably where there's less obvious recycling, and those are the things that I think we can certainly still improve on, and work between facilities and property management and waste management is going on at the moment, just to kind of work through that process so that all schools have maximised the levels of recycling.
Thank you, Andrew. I'm grateful for that. Again, I am just absolutely clear that the young people it is their future that we're talking about, and I think we have such a responsibility to ensure that we have complete integrity on our end-to-end processes. And when we are encouraging them to recycle at school, then we must make sure that absolutely every part of our chain ensures that the work that they are being encouraged to really take part of what will be their routine for the rest of their lives is that we actually ensure that we have complete integrity in our system and that there are no mistakes that happen. And I'm using that term very loosely in terms of from our collection processes to how we actually deal with the waste that they have already recycled. So again, it's an absolute assurance that I'm looking for in that, because we certainly owe our young people that if we are setting and listening to what they are actually saying to us, then we have a responsibility to have complete integrity in our delivery systems.
Through you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, I absolutely agree. And as I say, I mean, even just in terms of the Young People's Conference, the two young people that were presenting around the waste, the work that they did, and obviously there was some videos produced as well that obviously set out that process in terms of how it's recycled. Clearly, I think as we've seen, even from a domestic point of view, we've got less than 50% of people using the food waste, and again, we're only recycling a fraction of what we can do. So whether it's in the schools, whether it's people at home, or whether it's businesses, these are all areas that, as part of the engagement and the action plan that we're taking forward, are areas that we really do want to focus more on, because I would admit, I think there has obviously been examples, and there have been schools where some of the arrangements have not been as good as they could be. And again, we need to make sure that we are supporting them as much as possible. And as I said, I think some of that's around the promotion and making sure that the obvious connections between what is getting put into a recycling bin is actually understood in terms of where it goes and how it's recycled right the way through the process. So absolutely, I think there's certainly still more work to be done.
Okay, thank you very much, Matt. Thank you.
Thank you, Maureen. Councillor Grant, Ian.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, first of all, Andrew, thanks for the report. It's great to see that our ambition is to continue to lead and not just follow in these areas. And your team and yourself are doing a sterling job in ensuring that's the case. Just to go slightly off the message just a little bit, there's been a report in the Daily Record that one major council in Scotland has written to the Scottish Government on the subject of the new smoke detector systems that are due to be completed by the end of February. And what they've said is that due to the shortage of equipment and manpower to install them into domestic properties, they've put in a request to the government that they delay that deadline by a year. And I was wondering, also I'm aware that East Renfrewshire Council are considering putting in a similar letter for similar reasons. Now, I know that there are reasons why we would want these done as quickly as possible, but the deadline has two issues. One is that if there is a shortage of equipment, we're making it difficult for people to comply. And secondly, we're talking about quite a considerable cost, £300 or £400 at a time when people's gas bills are going through the roof, and it might be easier on them just to stick with the equipment they've got, but that's a different matter. But on either side of things, I wondered if we as a council might consider the merits of such an extension, and perhaps if we did consider that it was to the advantage of our population to join those requests that seem to be starting to grow at the moment. Thanks, Andrew.
Through you, Chair. Obviously, just a slight diversion from the topic of the report. What I would need to do again is I would need to maybe take that back to colleagues, particularly sort of obviously from a housing point of view. It's not necessarily within my remit. Therefore, I would need to obviously speak to other colleagues just in terms of a view and how likely meeting the requirements will be. So if I can come back to you on that one.
Could I just say that as far as I'm aware, from information that I have from the housing, that I think they're up about 85–90% of council-owned houses are compliant now, that they were working through it and that they're almost there. As far as the private housing is concerned, there seems to be a slight difficulty that nobody knows who's going to administer this new legislation that says you must have these things. I think the general consensus is that it's going to be up to a kind of indirect, in as much as it's the insurance companies that are going to, there's going to be a box that you've got to tick in your next application for house insurance, and if you don't tick the box, then you won't be covered for insurance. But there doesn't seem to be anyone administering or enforcing the legislation. But as far as our housing is concerned, the council-owned housing, I think we're almost there. But perhaps Andrew could follow that up with housing. We might get a more definite response. Thanks.
Yeah.
Ian?
Mr. Chairman, yeah, I'm absolutely delighted that we're at that stage with our own housing. And it doesn't surprise me because councils are very, very good at following legislation and preparing, especially this council, we're very, very organised. The thing that concerns me, and I'm not going to stand in a bandbox and wave a flag about it, but the thing that does concern me is, irrespective of who's responsible for checking it, by the first week in March, I suspect, possibly due to a shortage of equipment, but certainly due to a shortage of money, a large percentage of the houses in the area, privately owned houses, many of which fall into Kilmarnock North, my own patch, are going to suddenly find themselves the following morning without insurance, whether they ticked a box or not, because you don't need me to tell you that any insurance company that can have some sort of get out of paying £100,000 for a repair to a house is going to take it. So as a council, if we consider this, and I know I didn't ask Andrew because I wanted him to make a definite action today, but I know you know the right people, and we'd be able to sort of look at this and give it some consideration. But I'm going to shut up now because it's I was well off the road that we're travelling, so I'll let you get on. Thanks.
Thanks, Ian. If I don't think there's anyone else wanting in, so sorry to the recommendations on page 51. It's agreed to note. Everyone okay with that? Thank you. We can now move on to the next item in the agenda, which is the East Ayrshire Performs, and is going to be started off at least by Joe. Thanks, Joe.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, members, and I'll start it off. This is the East Ayrshire Performs report. It was approved by Cabinet last week. It's the second East Ayrshire Performs report of this financial year. It builds on the information that I presented to this committee in September and takes account of any subsequent information and approval that's been received by Cabinet since then. To start off with, members, the general uninhabited balance, that important figure that we monitor and report on at each period, is just over £9 million. It's 2.5% of our net revenue expenditure. It's a tad low, and we'll keep an eye on that during the year and take efforts wherever possible to try and increase that. You know as well that following the approval of the revenue budget, that we take steps throughout these reports to inform members of any action that's taken place in relation to those savings options that were approved. They are listed at paragraph 8. You'll see that 99%, almost all of the savings that you approved as part of this year's budget have been achieved, and those budgets have been adjusted accordingly. And paragraph 8 just notes one or two that were still being worked on and will be worked on by relevant heads of service throughout the year. Touching on the revenue budget, it's probably fair to say, members, that we've got a budget that's a bit different from before. It's been impacted by COVID, and it's been impacted by COVID in different ways. Indeed, different services are experiencing different pressures from COVID. In education, and we'll see this further in the accompanying report, the services are predicted to end the year overspent by around £400,000. It's to do with transport costs as well as for additional support needs, and also for additional costs that flowed into the department following the decant of some of our schools. Andrew and I have spoken about those decant costs for future, and we'll take steps to charge them to relevant capital programmes. But at this point in time, education projecting to end the year around £400,000. That takes account, members, of the funding that Cabinet approved at period 4, that 1.9, just under £2 million that was allocated across services to help them get through this year and through the impact of COVID costs and COVID loss of income. Paragraph 10 gives a summary of the financial issues that are being felt within the communities and economy branch of services. And here we're saying that at this point in time, those combined services are looking to end the year with an overspend of £288,000. It's actually much more than that, it's £2 million. But you'll recall that at period 4, Cabinet gave approval to allocate £1.7 million from our COVID recovery funds to help those services. And this goes back to the point that I made just a few moments ago about different services seeing different types of pressures. In wellbeing, at paragraph 11, they're going to end the year with an underspend of around £1.5 million. And that's because it's a service that, like other services, is being really impacted by COVID. But it's a service that can issue a mobilisation plan to Scottish Government, essentially an invoice for the COVID costs that they are incurring. In the year, they've spent around £4.5 million on fighting COVID. They've sent in those mobilisation plans, those invoices, and they've received back around £3.1 million, and there's another invoice to go in. And when all that's taken into account, the service will end the year underspent by that £1.5 million. But you're seeing at paragraph 11, just some of the extraordinary work that service is doing in terms of maintaining, for want of a better word, the private care home sector, both in terms of PPE and staffing and resources. Additional costs for out with placements and additional costs for PPE. And so what you're finding in this last few minutes is some services overspending, some by £2 million, and some underspending by £1.5 million. And it's showing the range of impacts across our services. But it also recognises that members here and at Cabinet have recognised this early on and have put in place that £2 million to help those services. What I would say is that in the past few weeks, health and social care and education have unusually received recurring COVID money. We don't usually get recurring COVID money, but they've received recurring COVID money. Now, what it means is that £1.5 million of an underspend for wellbeing will increase, and that service will end the year several £1 million underspent. And it's not to say that they don't have plans to spend it. They do indeed have plans, but the timing of that allocation, together with the work that they're doing, means that the plans will take some time to bring to life and to action, and that's recognised in the funding. So it's quite a complex revenue picture. Rest assured that budget holders, heads of service, are on top of everything. But the second financial year of COVID is quite different from the first financial year of COVID. And I would imagine as we go into the third year, next year, it will be even more stranger for us. But we're managing it. And what I would say, and I say this whenever I get the opportunity, structurally, those budgets you set and approved at the beginning of March last year are sound, but they are being impacted by quite stormy weather from COVID through additional costs that they have to incur or additional income loss. And Andrew was the report before me in facilities and property management. The issue there is loss of income, loss of school meals income, loss of commercial income, loss of a whole range of other income. So you're seeing services losing income and other services having to spend like never before. So that's the COVID picture. You know that we received COVID recovery funds of £14.25 million. Members approved at period 4 to give £2 million to those services, and that's what you're seeing before you today. £12 million left, and speaking to group leaders around the allocation of that, and plans are being devised to bring back to members in due course. Paragraph 14 of the report touches on approval at Cabinet for spend at Auckland Leisure Centre. It essentially takes on board and puts into financial context the decision of Cabinet on the 27th of October to set aside £400,000 to defer the closure of that centre pending a further feasibility study. That's one reason why the general fund uncommitted balance has been down to £9 million. Cabinet also asked to approve a spend of £20,000 from my underspend this year to help those towns and communities to install the Christmas lights. We're finding that the arrangements with contractors are a bit different this year because of backlogs of work that they already have and because of additional costs in deploying those operatives to put that up. So it's important that towns and villages get the lights up, that they get some brightness and happiness in the face of everything else. And so that was approved by Cabinet. I know Simon will touch on the capital element later on, but it's period 7. And so at this time of year, we take stock of the in-year capital programme and we look at whether or not some of that should be reprofiled. As you would imagine, and in line with previous years, it's right to reprofile that. In Cabinet last week, we were asked to reprofile just under £16 million as listed on the table at paragraph 17 to future years. And so that was approved by Cabinet. The works around Patna and St Saviour's Primary that started off with an investigation and inspection following water ingress has grown to calling to doubt the actual fabric of the roof itself and the need for scaffolding to be put up. That's now been done. But a call for Cabinet to be ready for a further report to come back on the scale of the works that will be required after the investigations, the more detailed investigations have taken place. And in terms of the Lake Kirk, noting here that the work that took place to remove and replace coping stones cost more than was originally anticipated, £18,000 more, taking that £30,000 initial cost up to £48,000. That was due to, upon investigation, recognising and realising that the stones themselves were set in concrete and not mortar. Paragraph 25 and thereafter touches on people and health and safety, and with your approval, Chair, I won't go through them and we'll discuss them as we go through the accompanying report. What I would say is that in terms of risk registered and that corporate risk registered at the back end of the next report, that was reviewed by the corporate management team on the 10th of November. You'll be aware as we go through this quite unusual period that corporate risks are reviewed regularly, and I'll talk more about that with your approval, Chair, as we go through the accompanying report. I'm happy to stop there at this point and take any questions, Chair.
Thanks, Joe. Members, have any questions at this point? I don't see anyone. We'll just carry on. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. And we begin on page 104 of your report, and this sets out in more detail the revenue budget matters that are being experienced by services. And you can see at that top table in education, the actual picture of the budget in education is an overspend of £707,000, but recognising that in the last East Ayrshire Reforms report, as part of that £2 million of COVID funds that was allocated, 297,000 was allocated to education to help support them, and so that overspend is 410. In finance and ICT, my service redesign is progressing, and the reason for that underspend is due to me delaying vacancies and holding back on posts as we go forward. And in governance, it's to do partly with the same, but also recognising that planning sits within governance now, and that planning income and body warrant income is there too. Page 105, members, is where we see the matters and the real issues that are taking place within communities and economy. Almost a different fight against COVID. In health and social care, you're seeing that care element and that maintaining of care. In communities and economy, you're seeing trying to keep the day-to-day business of the council operating, but recognising doing so against that backdrop of restrictions. And you're seeing that in terms of Ayrshire Roads Alliance, there's almost a £680,000 plan to spend over budget. However, after allocating that funding at period 4, that falls down to £70,000. We see here in terms of facilities and property management, that under recovery, that loss of income, £315,000 in respect of the rental from Burns Mall, and £505,000 from the under recovery of school meals income and corporate catering income, alongside a capital fee loss of £250,000. And that £832,000 that was added in at period 4 to bolster that service as they work through that temporary loss of income. It will recover, members, but it may take some time. And so, although we see that £288,000 on the bottom right-hand column of that overspend, that's really £1.864 million of an overspend, given that £1.7 million of that £2 million was added into this service to help them get through this financial year. And the following page, at page 106, goes into more detail on wellbeing, and it touches on those points that I mentioned earlier. There's underspends in community care, and bolstered by both the funding that was allocated by yourself, but more importantly, by those mobilisation plans, those reimbursements from Scottish Government, as it's recognised that it's health and social care that's widening its role to almost support and maintain the private sector element of the care market at this time. At the bottom of page 106, we're seeing housing benefit and council tax benefit subsidy, and we're actually at this point spending more in council tax recovery, council tax reduction, around £364,000 more than we have money for. And that's just, I suppose, members, the best way to describe it is COVID is alive and well across the UK and across our budgets, but it's at different points. There are some points that are feeling the brunt and other points that are feeling the tail. And at this point, in terms of the council tax recovery, council tax reduction, and spending more in supporting families with council tax payments, we're seeing the end of furlough, but at the same time, we're seeing the tail of the spend that took place last year that's really benefiting some families in terms of that support. In terms of the housing revenue account at page 108, again, it's a similar story to that of wellbeing, in that the underspend of £1.5 million on wellbeing masks a whole number of pressures points. The same in housing revenue account. You'll see in the papers before you the housing revenue account is estimated to end the year with an underspend of £2.7 million. That masks a whole number of matters. Essentially, there are underspend in staffing costs, but at the same time, there's the consequences of the housing revenue account not being able to deploy operatives to do work in people's houses, both on the revenue front, but more importantly, on the capital front. And we know that, Cabinet earlier on last month approved a suite of housing revenue account reports around the Housing Improvement Plan and the Housing Asset Management Framework, all of which designed to create and implement capital works in houses. But for the year past, and because of the restrictions, that work couldn't take place. So what you then see is the planned spend on capital didn't take place. The recharging to capital didn't take place. We didn't buy materials, so we had money saved there. But it means the programme needs to take place at faster pace to try and catch up. And so that £2.7 million you're seeing here is essentially the financial footnote of all of those implications. So again, with the housing revenue account, an underspend, but a real need now to, once restrictions permit, to really bolster that programme and to deploy far more operatives so that they can catch up and do essentially more than 12 months work within 1 year. Chair, I'm happy to stop there before I move on to the other sections, if that's okay.
Yep, that's fine, Joe. Members, any questions for Joe? I think really Joe and his staff have to be commended, given that the way he's gone through the report, the difficulties that all the different departments are facing. But I think we can rely on Joe's assurances that everything is still okay. I think it's a matter of keep calm and carry on. I think they have to be commended, the finance department and the department heads have to be commended in getting us through this very, very sticky period, and that hopefully, as Joe says, that we'll come out of it at the other end and we'll be ready to get systems back in place and get back on an even keel. So thanks for that, Joe. Maureen, I think Councillor Mackay wants in.
Thank you very much, Joe. Again, thank you for your report, and thank you again. I would echo what Chair Mayor has actually said here in terms of the work that you and your staff have undertaken. I think, though, we really do have to keep drawing to attention. Yes, the underspends are there. We are also at a time where we're seeing inflation mounting, and that, of course, will have a huge impact on what we are actually able to do with the money. The fact that we were not able to secure the goods that we actually need to then go on to deliver, and I'm only talking about one area, and that would be in terms of the work that we want and aspire to do to our own housing stock. And again, that can be seen across the board. And we're also talking about increasing wages, and we understand why wages are actually needing to increase at this moment in time, and would want that to go forward. But all of that is actually going to have an impact. So the fact that we've actually got significant underspends in areas is not necessarily going to be something that's a positive for us going forward, because I'm sure that not only is that money earmarked, but much more money is what we will actually need available to deliver what our plans and aspirations actually were.
Through you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Mackay. You're absolutely right. We have different pressures hitting us. It's been a fair while since we had to deal with inflation at the rate that it's at. It's probably been 10 years or so. And so between that and availability of materials and staff, we're alert to it. We've built that elements of that this year's budget, and it is something we're focused on. And you're right to recognise around those underspends, because we will continue to press for additional support, recognising the unique pressures that are live within us, and hopefully get that. But we, as colleagues elsewhere have touched on, we are alert to and very aware of, across the council and across heads of service, the pressure points that could build up through inflation and through other costs.
Thank you very much, and we're glad that we have your hands on this, Joe. Thank you.
Thanks for that. Can we just, if I don't see anyone else hands up, so can we just move on, Joe? You on next to the People Equity Fund? Thank
you, Chair. So this is the Period 7 report is the first time that we see the current year's Pupil Equity Fund broken down on a school-by-school basis, and that's because head teachers and the management team since August have had their allocation, and they've been devising their plans. Those plans, as members know better than me, form an intrinsic part of the school improvement plans. The school improvement plans have been approved at each school by the parent council and the like, and so from that we then are able then to show individual plans for PEF. They are as listed, and it's commend head teachers and the management teams that against the pressures they're currently facing in school, there's still that plan in place to spend this fund on the areas of real need. If I can, members, will draw your attention to page 112 and to the bottom of the right-hand column called Projected Earmark. And we're showing on this report that there's likely to be an underspend in Pupil Equity Fund of around £530,000 at the 31st of March. That, as I've said before, means nothing to schools. They operate to an academic year and not a financial year. And so we need to capture for our own accounts the position at 31st of March. Schools will continue to spend that £530,000 through payroll costs for April, May, and through part of June. So we'll hear more and learn more about Pupil Equity Fund as we go through the year into the next report that will come to members just after the new year. But it is as listed, and as I said, that allocation has been allocated to schools, and colleagues from finance, from HR, and from procurement support head teachers and the management team in the deployment of their Pupil Equity Fund plans. Chair, if I can, with your approval, just continue and move on to alternative delivery models. And that begins at page 114. And in this section of the report, we capture two entities. We capture Ayrshire Roads Alliance and East Ayrshire Leisure Trust. And in terms of the Ayrshire Roads Alliance, or ARA, we see here that there's projected to underspend by £600,000. We know from previous reports that split into three elements. The first is that strategic delivery part, where the designers and all the planners are allocated to Pan Ayrshire, and we're seeing that that's going to underspend by around £400,000 due to the timing of vacancies, as well as lower insurance costs and additional income from capital programmes. In terms of the local delivery at East and local delivery at South, you're seeing a £227,000 underspend, and South Ayrshire Council local delivery breaking even. You're seeing as well here on this page that there's a shortfall in our planning income, a parking income, beg your pardon, in our parking income of around £500,000. Now, that's a lot of money, but against that, just to put it into perspective and into context rather, the parking income budget is £1.5 million, £1.4 million. So the service is realising £900,000 of income, which is incredible compared to where we were last year. So it goes back to these points about where is COVID and where are the tails and where are the parts that are taking off. And again, in some services and even in sub-services within services, we're seeing parts taking off and parts begin to trail and tail. And in parking, that's a good news story in terms of what Kevin and the team have managed to achieve. In the capital part, we can see that as listed, but we also recognise the delays that have taken place because of restrictions there too. And in terms of the Leisure Trust, incredible work done by Annika and her team, looking to end the year around £200,000 overspent. You can rest assured that that team are working hard to bring that down. They're doing that against a backdrop where some elements of the trust are operating okay. But similar to last year, we're seeing real pressures in the sports development arm, the gym arm, and we're not alone in that. You know, private sector gyms are feeling the same thing. And you can see from the page at the paper, page 115, you know, £300,000 overspent in terms of sport development in that gym and fitness part. The rest of the trust doing really well, and I'm confident that as we go through subsequent reports, members, that you'll see that £200,000 coming down. And just moving on to the Treasury part, it's as noted previously, it shows the debt portfolio of the council is just under £400 million. It sets out the percentage with Public Works Loan Board and at what rate. It also recognises the total of our investments, that £38 million which we have invested at this point in time. You know, members, that this committee normally receives the Treasury reports. The mid-year Treasury report is due, and that will go to Council fairly soon, and we'll give it more details around our Treasury position. Very, very conscious. Just as Councillor Mackay and others have touched on, you know, for the Treasury part, it's not really about its inflation, it's about interest rates. That will be to the fore on that one. So bring that at some point to members in the future. But Chair, with your approval, I'll stop there before I hand across to Simon, who will take us through the capital section.
That's fine, Joe. Members, any questions? I don't see any hands up. So we'll just ask Simon to carry on with the capital programme. Simon, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Good morning, members. Maybe just say I've got a few broadband issues this morning, so hopefully I can manage to stay connected. So I'll maybe just take you to the main coloured report, which starts from page 119. So the capital programme's continuing to make good progress, but as I've noted before, we are facing some challenges around about the current market conditions. So there's an impact on supply of materials, which has already been talked about this morning. There's also volatility around about construction inflation, which, as I say, is posing some challenges for us. So again, as usual, I won't go through the report in great detail, but maybe if I could just provide an update on a selection of projects in terms of their stage of development. Projects that I've recently completed include the final phases of works at the Barney campus to form the bus drop-off and parking facilities at the site of the former Cumnock Academy. And the biomass heating installation at Stuarton Academy is presently being commissioned. That work is completed there. I've got a number of projects currently on site. They include the refurbishment and extension to Crosshouse Primary and Communication Centre, where the superstructure for the new extension's been erected. We've got the new build in Netherthird Primary School, where construction works commenced on the 6th of September and are progressing well. And there's also a number of new build housing developments as part of the SHIP programme, including Witch Road in Kilmarnock, Millishield, Strongen and Corrynow and Auchinleck. Projects that are planned to start on site during 2022 include the Enerfit refurbishment at St Sophia's Primary School, which is currently at technical design stage. We've got the redevelopment of the formal local office in Galston, where a planning application is going to be lodged in the near future. And the new build Dunlop Early Childhood Centre, where market testing information is being finalised with the preferred contractor. In terms of projects at earlier stages of development, the Doon Valley Community Campus, the accommodation schedule and briefing documents are being developed with the key stakeholders. At Stuarton Academy, feasibility designs for the extension are currently being finalised. And in relation to the Ayrshire growth deal, stage 3 concept design proposals are an advanced stage with the core project, and with the Moorfield phase 3 project, further site investigation works have recently been completed and they are currently being reviewed. So that's just a quick kind of overview of some of the key points, Chair. I'm happy just to stop there and answer any questions on these or any of the other projects. Thanks.
Members, any questions? No.
Thank you. If I may.
Okay.
Thank you. Simon, this is just a general comment overall, and it's really, I suppose, primarily targeted in relation to schools within our capital programme. And that is, if I'm a parent, I have a child, of course, at school for a very limited length of time. Now, clearly, we are in a situation, and it may well be that we are continuing to be in a situation where what we see is more and more delays. If I know, for instance, my child is going to be in an early years centre or in a specific primary school, they're going to be there for a very limited length of time. What I see often is parents' expectations and excitement raised, but actually their child has got to an age where they actually are no longer in need of that particular service if it's an early years. So for instance, in relation to Dunlop Early Years Centre, that's taken, you know, a real considerable length of time to come into the pipeline. Within my own ward, of course, Northwest Kilmarnock School, which is certainly something that is needed and very much to be welcomed. But I also know that I am in contact with many parents whose children will no longer need that service before we actually get to a stage that we have actually got a service to offer. So is there some way, when we're actually looking at capital programme, that we can associate more realistic dates and estimates? And again, that's about managing community expectations and anticipations. And I think that's something that's really important and will increasingly be something that's more important going forward on coming out of this pandemic. Thank you.
Thanks, and maybe through you, Chair. Thanks, Councillor Mackay. I completely understand, appreciate the comments. We have faced a number of challenges. Obviously, COVID has impacted significantly and been able to develop some projects to the timescales we had hoped. Others have had other challenges. The Dunlop Early Childhood Centre posed some significant site challenges in terms of enabling works that had to be undertaken. But you're right, that project has taken longer than we had hoped. We also have the kind of backdrop of climate change that is we are now trying to weave into all our future decisions around about schools. So some primary schools where we had hoped to undertake some upgrading works, these have been delayed. However, I'm thinking of schools like Nether Robertland, maybe in Comores, where there was significant capital investment allocated, but primarily around about building fabric and mechanical and electrical services. So we're currently reviewing those in line with our climate change aspirations, because obviously that the scope of these works have to be carefully considered around about a net zero approach. But what we have done in the interim is to try and improve the learning and teaching environments in these establishments and undertake upgrading works internally around about finishes, sort of painter work, floor finishes, upgrading of some of these facilities, which are actually getting very good feedback, positive feedback from the parent councils. I was at a parent council meeting for Nether Robertland just a couple of weeks ago, and good positive results. So yeah, it is a challenge, and we try and manage expectations and put appropriate and reasonable programmes and timescales around it, and work closely with parent councils to manage that. So, you know, hopefully that's given some sort of you know, information around about that. Thank you.
Thanks, Simon.
Thank you, Simon.
Councillor Todd, Jim, you wanted in?
Thanks, convener. While I'm not entirely against Maureen's views there, the balanced view would be that it's good to send out these messages of what the council's proposals are for the future in different areas, because it gives families the opportunity to plan ahead. So I think it's a part of a balance. I would always like to know what's happening in the future before I make a decision that would directly affect my family. And the more information that families get for what is being proposed in an area is all to the better. But I totally understand what Maureen's saying. You get aspirations and maybe they take a longer period of time. It's just the world that we live in at the moment. And I've been affected by blockages in transport. I know my views on that. It's all to do with Brexit, but also issues in terms of materials and and the cost of materials. So things are changing. It really is dynamic. But I think that it's a good idea to know what is being proposed in your area for the future. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. Simon, maybe I could ask, 1 Dunlop Street, 12 Strand Street. It's been a long-standing problem, if you like, in Kilmarnock. Could you maybe outline what the proposals are there? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. So, yeah, there have been outline proposals developed for the redevelopment of that site. There is capital funding sitting there. So they have been taken to a stage of feasibility design, and there's been discussions with our colleagues in planning around about that. Through economic development and David McDowell, we're also looking at the kind of wider scope around about town centre regeneration and how that fits into the sort of development of the Ingram Enterprise Centre and any other kind of future town centre developments. So it's at that early sort of concept stage just now, and final agreement just on how that's going to be taken forward, still to be reached.
That's fine, thank you. If there are no other, I don't see any other hands up, so can we can move on to the next section, which is the people section, and Amanda's going to take us through this one. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. Morning, members. Similar to Simon, I don't intend to go through all the points, but we'll take questions at the end. I'll just pick out some key points for you. People pages start at page 126, and at the top of that page is a table detailing the workdays lost per employee, noting that it's significantly raised from the same period last year to 5.74 from 2.97, which is an increase of 2.77. But I would simply note that is due to lockdown being last year, the numbers were particularly low. Similarly, at the bottom of the same page, you'll note that all the short-term absence categories have increased from last year in the same period, and the long terms have decreased again. That's simply due to lockdown. The positive note there is the long term decreasing, and that's because we're starting to get a wee bit of movement with people getting operations and helping them to recover, and also getting reports back to GPs and consultants. That's given a bit of movement there. Over the page, in page 127, details the supports and services available for employees. Again, I would note halfway down the page, occupational health appointments have increased from 186 at this period last year to 529, again related directly to COVID. At the bottom of the page, noting that both physio and employee counselling are down in the same period last year. We've seen a bit of an impact of this being all moved to being online, so we're starting to do a more blended model. We're having it face to face, and we have increased the pilot rollout of the app for employee counselling to all our school and education and colleagues, and we're starting to see an increase in the usage of that. Page 128, the top of that page shows the disciplinary activity, and I would just note that the ones that were under consideration have now all been concluded, and the ones with the other actions were no further action. The bottom of the page shows our head count, and you'll notice an increase of 129, 2% in the period, same period last year, and for the 12-month period, an increase of 4%. Over the page, at the full-time equivalent, there's an increase in the head count similar to that of the head count. Under 25s, again, noting an increase from same period last year, and just to reassure members that work is continuing in this area to increase this going forward. Finally, on page 30, you'll note that to that period there was 288 leavers, 288 new employees to the council, and 199 leavers. The bottom of that page gives some key facts for our organisational development services, detailing the uptake for FACE, coaching and spaces for listening, with a few impact statements, and happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thanks, Amanda. Members, any questions on the People's section? No, I don't see any. We'll just move on. The Health and Safety section, David Owens is going to take us through this one.
Thanks, Chair, and good morning, members. Like Simon, having a wee bit of bother with my internet this morning, so hopefully I can get through this without any dramas. If we could just take members to the top of page 132 of the summary report. We noted that the number of non-reportable incidents reported to the Health and Safety section has increased by 28 when we compare that to 2019-20 figures, while the number of incidents reportable to HSE has increased by 3. These are fairly modest rises, Chair, but I think it's still likely that the comparator will have been affected by coronavirus restrictions which were in place for last year, so that just has to be borne in mind in terms of the comparator drawing. If I could look to draw attention to the bottom of page 132 of the summary report, the incidents under the category of violence and aggression accounted for 63% of all incidents reported, and remains our highest cause of incidents reported, as I've reported to previous committees as well. Just in terms of interventions, we continue to work with all services and with our trade union colleagues to reduce incidents of violence and aggression as far as we possibly can. And if I could just draw one particular example of that work, Chair, I recently met with our education trade union colleagues through our ongoing violence and aggression focus group around implementation of updated crisis intervention training in schools, and that will be delivered by our trained colleagues in East. Looking at the figures themselves, I'm conscious that we're in an open session, Chair, so unfortunately I'm not able to get into specific detail about the statistics that's presented here, but I can advise members that many of the incidents which are reported are specific and they're complex, and they tend to be associated with dysregulated behaviour. So what you're tending to see is the drivers of these figures is very specific, very complex cases within our establishments without being specific. Moving on, within the page 100, section 29 of the Covering Report, members will note that there have been 1,929 unannounced inspections recorded across all of our high risk activities, and that covers things such as roads, construction activities, and as well as our regular COVID checks which are ongoing throughout our buildings and our schools, and that provides the reassurance that our COVID safety measures continue to remain robust throughout this pandemic. Just a short summary of everything there, Chair, and I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thanks, David. Members, I don't see any hands. We're happy to move on. We're now going on to the business briefing.
Thank you, Chair. Begins at page 135, and like colleagues before, I don't intend to go through each one, but maybe pick out some of the more important ones for you. Starting, as I said, at page 135, The first one there, the average number of days to process new benefit claims for change of event target is just under 6 days. We're well within that target, albeit we've seen a slight deterioration in performance, and that's not due to any issue with staff or with any other matter. It's the staff have been working on school meals applications, clothing grant applications, and more recently on the low-income pandemic payment. And they've been concluded. However, what's happened now is that the staff are dealing with the implications arising from the change to universal credit. Firstly, the withdrawal of the £20 payment, and more recently, the change in the taper that was announced as part of the Chancellor's budget. That, in turn, for revenues and benefits sections across the land, means that the information we receive from DWP each day means that we then have to reassess all applicants who are on UC. So that's what's currently happening. They've managed to put low-income pandemic payments to bed, and this new piece of work is taking place. What it will mean in broad terms is that as the DWP element of the benefits falls, where possible, the council tax benefit will increase as a result. So redeterminations taking place and reassessments for a whole number of people. In terms of the other indicators that are listed there, they're all green. FOIs, freedom of information request and planning, just a slight dip, but noting there that, you know, of those 12 applications, that those 12 queries that came in, 11 were dealt with, and it was just the one that was caused a bit of delay. Page 137 sets the pictures on those key indicators that services within communities and economy would like to draw your attention to. They are noted as around rent arrears and around recycling of household waste. And I suppose the paragraphs that follow tell their own story, but to summarise it, you know, last year, both in terms of rent follow-up and in council tax follow-up, we suspended that, and it was the right thing to do. As we bring those services back into flow again, there was always a tail and always a backlog, and that's the implications of that. It's not to say that we are not dealing with that issue. We are, but we're doing that against the backdrop and recognition that it may take some time for some people to catch back up with both rent and with council tax. And in terms of household waste recycling, it's incredible that, you know, we were able to launch a booking system for our recycling centres that led to our residents turning up at an allotted time and going in. It wasn't the same elsewhere. But what you're seeing in this indicator is that period of time when those centres were closed because of restrictions. It's that tail again, that aftermath that we're seeing. The table, the paragraphs that follow provides really helpful information in terms of repairs, inspections, and also in terms of school meal uptake. That's really important to us to make sure that those people who are due whatever benefit or support, maybe not benefits the right word, but support, get it, and we actively encourage that. And page 140 just sets out the indicators for wellbeing. Hospital discharge over 2 weeks is still green. You're seeing delayed discharge bed days, which is a target of 490 days, is slightly higher. And those of us, including members here today, who've been involved in the work with colleagues in health and social care or have read the Chief Executive's blog, have got a hint of the pressures that are taking place within hospitals and within home care as we deploy staff from across a range of services to try and help those frontline personal carers to cope with the demands that are being placed upon them at this time. Chair, with your approval, I'll continue on to page 142 and on to the complaints. They are as listed. They note the total of 49 complaints within this period, together with a further 14 that carried forward from the previous period. It notes that, similar to some of Amanda's indicators in terms of sickness and the like, complaints are also up. They're up on this time last year. You can see on that table there in terms of the 119 complaints received in 2019-20 and the 115 for the full year of last year. We're in 2 periods of this year and we've received 101 complaints. So our period 2 complaints are high. And that again is because in most cases to catch up with works and issues around pandemic and restrictions. And you know that Ian Tuff and colleagues have done a great piece of work aligning our complaints policy to that of the Ombudsman's model policy. That in itself provides details of our learning, our improvement actions that derive from those complaints, where we investigate and find that something could have been done differently or better. Some of those action points are listed at the bottom of page 142, and the time taken to deal with complaints are in the page that follows. And you'll see that in terms of stage 1 complaints, 4.6 days, similar to the same period last year. But the stage 2 complaints, 18 days last year, 44 days this year. But noting that there was a specific complaint within education that took 120 days to deal with. If that's taken out of the figures, then the figures become more comparable with those last year. Chair, I'm happy to stop there before I move on to risks.
Thanks, Joe. Members, any questions? Just move on. Okay, Joe, carry on.
Chair.
Thank you.
And so in terms of those corporate risks that come before Cabinet and by this committee periodically, just to start off by saying that there's been no new risks added, nor has the rating of any of the risks that are shown in the accompanying pages have been changed. Again, I'll just pick out some of the key ones in talking about 1A, the economic climate and the level of grant funding available. You know, members, from the budget strategy report, some of the key dates that we're working to. We've got the budget strategy report approved. We have our allocations submitted to services. Those options for savings are in. We wait and look forward to the 9th of December when the current Secretary for Finance will announce the Scottish budget on a pan-public sector basis. On the 16th of December, we'll then see the detailed analysis for individual councils, including our own. And that's the date that we're working to and bring something back to members shortly thereafter. And in terms of the impact on the income collected by the council, you know, we continue to monitor this and to support those services who are going through the pain of that loss of income. We recognise, and we can see it in parking income, that again, it's not going to be one size fits all. There'll be some pieces of income that will come back faster than others. And we just need to support those services through that. And you know that in terms of the budget strategy that Cabinet approved last week, that in terms of our revenue budget for next year that you will be asked to set in February next year, that there are no plans to increase any of our fees and charges other than those that are set by national bodies. So that again will help us in that regard. And in terms of risk 1C and the impact on residents and demand for services, we do have funding in our COVID recovery for, well, we can make it as wide as possible and as wide as we always can. And you know that members, that from the work that you do, your groups do, and also what the officers do to support you, that we try and widen the scope of that. There are some things that we need to discuss with officers around, as other members touched on earlier, around energy costs and the like, and we'll bring that back at a later date. And I suppose just touching on to the tail end of the report and on climate, and you've heard Andrew's report earlier, and in terms of the pandemic, they are as listed. It gives an overview of the points taken from a range of indicators, including the points raised by the Chief Executive in his blog. It shows that in terms of East Ayrshire performance, it's a report that throughout it, I suppose in every page, you're seeing the pandemic. Rest assured, members, that in terms of the work that colleagues are doing in the council, particularly in the budget side of the house, we have a good uncommitted balance, and we have funding set aside, that £12 million to help to support service across the place. And in terms of staffing, you can see that the report that was carried Cabinet yesterday, next week, around plans for pay and grading and the like that we seek to bolster those wages as well. That essentially, Chair, is the East Ayrshire Performance Report for period 7. The recommendations for your committee today is on page 96, Roman numeral 1, where members are asked to note the report.
Thanks, Joe. Members, have any questions? I don't see any hands up. So can we move to the recommendations on page 95? If we look at the recommendations, 3.2 is to approve the proposed allocation from the general fund to provide funding for Occupational Leisure Centre. Excuse me. And number 3, approve the allocation of from Finance and ICT to provide support for the Christmas lights. Sorry. Yeah, aye. So with these 2 approvals, the rest are for noting. So can we agree to approve as directed and note? Okay.
Yep.
Thank you. We now move on to the last item on the agenda, which is the awarding of contracts. And David's here to take us through the report. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. Good morning, members. Nothing as exciting or as significant as any of the previous 3 reports, but as you know, this paper forms part of the suite of our governance arrangements, insofar as authority to award contracts is actually delegated to myself in conjunction with relevant heads of service to avoid the need to bring given outcomes here from procurement tendering processes, but the quid pro quo is in terms of open and transparent business that we do regularly report on a quarterly basis the tenders we've carried out, not just who we've awarded contracts to, but who all else was able to bid and what those bids were. And where appropriate, we also capture information in relation to those contracts that would be expected to yield community benefits, the additional community benefits that have been yielded. So members have the awards for the period. Everyone will have perhaps their own areas of interest, etc., etc. The ones maybe to point out are clearly the most significant ones would be around the Nether Third Schools contract was finally awarded in this period. There was a bit of give and take on 1 or 2 particular terms, so it wasn't that the whole process was delayed. There was just a bit of what I thought was an unnecessary dispute on 1 or 2 points, but we got it over the line, and it will be built. I thought it'll be August rather than the June or the May, but we will get Nether Third done. So that's probably the most significant one in terms of progress, but that's not to decry any others. Members will see that there's the contract for the supply and delivery of the lanterns. I agree with Andrew from the earlier query. Well, ARA will need to confirm how they deal with complaints if lighting is considered to be too low. But in terms of the procurement approach, we are, of course, seeking to get the lowest energy consuming bulbs as part of the greater climate strategy. So there is a balance to be struck between saving money and saving the environment and not putting people at danger in darkened streets. So I don't actually know how they respond. Hopefully they do go out and see if there's anything to be done to top it up, but that will be picked up by our colleagues, as Andrew said. Otherwise, the rest of the contracts are there simply for noting. They reflect the activity quality of our client services, who in turn are implementing the decisions of Council, Cabinet, etc., etc. So if there's any in particular queries or questions, we're happy to try and take them. Otherwise, it's there for your interest, information and noting, members. Thanks.
Members, any particular points? I don't see any, so we can agree to note. And that brings us to the close of the meeting. So thank you for your attention. Thank you for attending this morning, and hope to see you all soon. Thank you.